Go Hawks! So I want to tell you, not only is it exciting to see that some of you are so supportive that you wear a jersey or a shirt, but we are so supportive that our numbers today pretty much match the active roster of the Hawks today. Maybe we have a little more than that, but anyway, it's good to see you guys this morning. Let's go ahead and pray, and we'll get underway. Jesus, I thank you so much for the opportunity to come and to investigate your word, to investigate stories or scenarios or situations of people in the past in your word where they faced hardship, they faced challenge, they had questions, they wrestled with you. And I thank you that we can learn from that because we have the same challenges, we have the same dilemmas, we have the same frustrations. And you are still the God then, now, and forever who answers those things. Maybe not always in the way that we want answered, but in the way that is the best answer. And so I pray this morning and over the next few weeks as we are going through one of these little slivers of time where you are revealing yourself in a hard circumstance, I pray that we will take this to heart as we face our challenges, our hardships, our frustrations in life, and that we will look to you as our big God, our good God, our holy God, our loving God, our perfect God, and our sovereign God over those crazy affairs. And that from that we will only press into you more than become frustrated by the environment. And so, again, I'm asking you to do a big thing in us over the next few weeks. And I'm asking you to teach us in a way that it resides in our soul. It's not just data, but it resides in our soul and it shapes us. And so I'm asking you to do great and awesome things in your people, in your name. Amen. So as a kid, I had a wheelhouse of television shows when I was a littler kid, right? So there was those shows that it was just, I made sure that I would always watch them any chance I had, right? So some of those shows were like Justice League, man. Like I love Justice League cartoon. Anybody remember Thundar the Barbarian? Yeah. I love Thundar the Barbarian, Space Ghost, love Space Ghost, right? Captain Marvel, love that one too as a kid, and all those. But my mom was a good and wise mother. And she's like, he watches a lot of shows where lots of people just sort of die or kill things. And so he should be a little bit more rounded in his television diet. So she, every once in a while, at least encouraged me to watch PBS, which is nice. And so on PBS, I had certain shows. I remember the first time I saw Sesame Street. I was 4 years old, hated it. That big, giant, yellow bird freaked me out. Wanted no part of that big bird, right? Nothing. Did not like that show at all. But then there was a couple other shows that I really liked. One, does anybody remember the show Zoom on PBS, right? I love Zoom. In fact, that was the first word I learned to spell. I remember going into my mom, remember that paper you had as a kid that was like pulp tree brown with the blue lines, two big ones, a little dotted one in the middle, and I rolled in like, Zoom, I can spell. I'm 4. I'm a big boy now. And I learned that from that show, so I love Zoom. But my all-time favorite show on PBS was The Electric Company, right? They did little specials with Spider-Man. You'd be like, yeah, it's Spider-Man, and they would have the silhouettes where they would do the words like, power, and you'd be like, oh, yeah, power. And you would get kind of sucked in, right? Well, on The Electric Company, they had this little thing they would do, it seems almost every episode. They would have the word of the day, kind of like this cool power word for a 5-year-old, like you learn this and then you're rolling on the playground. Everybody's like, wow, he knows like 5-syllable words. That's amazing. So they had the word of the day, all right, on the Electric Company. And so I figured going into this series, you needed to have a word of the day. All right, a word of the series, a power word that you can throw around with your friends and in your regroup to look super, super intelligent. And that word for the day is the word theodicy. Theodicy, all right? So the word for the day is theodicy. How many people in this room go, I know what theodicy is? Pretty good. People that went to seminary or real Bible nerds. That's what we have there, right? So there's like 5 of us that know what theodicy is. So theodicy, very simply put, is the conviction regarding the goodness and the love and the power of God, even in light of the problem of suffering and evil, right? So it's that word or concept that says, you know what, yes, God is still loving, God is still all-powerful, and God is still good, Even though in our world we see a great deal of pain, suffering, anguish, and just dilemma of all kinds. Some of them are very small, some of them are very, very big. God is still good and loving and powerful in light of all of that. Now, I bring that up because almost all people at some juncture wrestle with this problem. They want to know when they watch the news or whatever else, why do bad things happen? Some people wrestle with this just at an intellectual level, right? So it's a bunch of people sitting around drinking coffee or whatever else, and they're just debating, this issue. If God is both loving and all-powerful, then how can there be evil? Because, again, maybe he wasn't all-powerful, but he's loving. Sure, he couldn't overcome it. Or if he's all-powerful but not loving, then of course there's evil. But to be both, there's a struggle. And so they just sit around as a bunch of scholars and discuss the problem. Others of us have wrestled with this question at a more personal and emotional level, right? Where maybe we've lost a loved one, or we've been diagnosed with cancer, or there's a problem with our child, or we just see things that break our heart, and emotionally we begin to wrestle very deeply with, why, God, are you doing this? Or why are you allowing this? Or why aren't you stepping in and stopping this, right? So it's an emotional thing. Some of us, it's truly a spiritual thing, where we're wanting to know, God, where are you in the mess? Like, it's just, is this the God I want to follow? If this is how he conducts business, right? So there's all sorts of layers to how people have wrestled with this reality or the question of the problem of suffering and evil in light of a good and all-powerful God. I know even for myself, this was the consuming question. Years and years ago, I couldn't let it go, right? I had to keep plodding through. I had to keep working it over, and to confess my sin in that. I so struggled with it that I had gone from a theological belief of believing in the sovereign handiwork of God into saying, God, he doesn't even know the future. That's how I'm going to solve the problem of evil. And so I said, God doesn't even know what's going to happen next. And that's how we identify why God struggles with evil, all the way to finally saying, I don't even want to follow this God because of the problem of evil. Right? I went through that entire journey, and there was a small season of my life that literally, I would say, I just didn't even believe in this God anymore. It was that frustrating for me. So I confess that, and that was all a slide of sin. There was things that all kind of build into that, but it was a slide of sin because I was so consumed with how can things happen that are bad if God is good and powerful. Right? It was a real struggle. Now, here's what I can tell you today. This was years ago. I can tell you today, I do not wrestle with this issue at all. I don't wrestle with it. Now, it doesn't mean that that there aren't times I don't have certain question marks, but I just don't wrestle. And the reason I don't wrestle is because I found that there's an equilibrium. It's not the answer that I wanted, but it's the answer. And I just learned to embrace the answer, right? Not the answer I want, but to learn to embrace the answer. There is peace there. Now, I bring all of that up because that is the journey that we are going to undertake for the next few weeks as we go through the book of Habakkuk. And so, if you have a Bible right now, I want you to open up to the book. Actually, I want you to open up to the very front of your Bible and find the book of Habakkuk is what I want you to do. I do not, because you'll be like, I know it's here, and it's going to be hard, right? So just go to the front, page 882, go to Habakkuk, right? Do yourself that favor right now. If you have a Bible app, this is super easy on your phone, right? You just click, click, click. I'm worried, I think about like my son, right, who pretty much will just use a Bible app, and like in 20 years, somebody's going to hand him a paper Bible and be like, look up Habakkuk. You'd be like, you have to use your hands with that thing? Like, just a finger? It's like Bibles that are paper are going to be like stick shifts for kids, all right? So don't even know how to use them, all right? So open up to the book of Habakkuk. That's where we're going to be hanging out here, like I said, for the next 3 weeks or so. Now, we entitled this series, God's Providence is Greater Than My Perspective, or Our Perspective, right? His providence is greater than our perspective, and that's very much what the book of Habakkuk is about. Now, we have a graphic. Last week we went through a survey of the Old Testament here, so you get a sense of where Habakkuk is in our survey. It's falling in the book of 2 Kings, roughly, right? Toward the end of 2 Kings, that's where things are going on. At this particular point in history, the 10 northern tribes have been wiped out by the Assyrians as far as taken into their captivity. Everything else, you just have the southern 2 tribes that are existing, and there's all sorts of things that are happening in this particular period of time. And so I want to go ahead and bring up that next graphic, the map, so you get a sense of what you're dealing with here. All right, so this is where it eventually lands, right? So this map here is a little later than where our story is going to start this morning, but you're going to get a sense of things. In this region at this time, there are three powerhouses. To the south, you have the Egyptians. Way up to the north, you have the Assyrians. Out to the east, you have the Babylonians. And in the middle of all of that, you have that cute little group of two tribes in Judah, where Jerusalem is, and they're nestled in the center of everything. Now, the three major players are major players in different ways or with different strengths, right? So I'm going to see if I can simplify this for you. The Egyptians have had a lot of power for a long period of time, but their power has been dipping and waning for a while. So they are, in my mind, if we're using boy bands as a model, the Egyptians are in sync, all right? So they had their time, everybody dug them, you kind of think they're dead, but then Justin Timberlake shows up on Jimmy Kimmel or somebody like that, and you're like, oh, I guess they're still kind of around a little bit. So they have some pull, or they're on like Food Network or other reality shows. So they exist, but they don't have the power that they used to. That's the Egyptians, right? Then you go up to the north to the Assyrians, right? And they've had more recent power, but they're starting to slip as well. So I would call them the Jonas Brothers, all right? And they're up there, and as soon as you think they're dead, then one of them shows up, like on New Year's Eve, Rockin' Eve with Dick Clark, even though Dick Clark isn't there or alive. And they're doing their thing. You're like, I guess the Jonas Brothers still sort of exist, right? And then to the Babylonian Empire, they're who? One Direction, right? So I know some of you are like, I don't know any of these boy bands. You know why? Because they don't last, like all these empires, all right? So, right? But that's kind of what's going on, right? So you have One Direction that is kind of on the rise of power in the boy band world. You have the Jonas Brothers who are kind of on their way out the door, and then you have NSYNC that's really out the door, but still trying to flex its muscles every once in a while. That's what's going on. And then in the middle, like I said, you have Judah. These two little tribes, which are basically three guys with an open guitar case on a corner in Sultan, right? And they think they're good at singing. They think that they're going to make a lot of money because they are opening for the homeless guy, and everything. But they have no real power or authority whatsoever, right? So they're in the middle of all of this. And everything's going through its challenges and turmoil and change. And so in this particular season, there is a particular king in Egypt, which is Necho or Nico, depending on how you want to pronounce it. We're going to call him Nico this morning. So Nico decides he wants to go into Assyria, right? And so the best route is going to be straight through Judah. Right? Well, in Judah, the king of Judah doesn't like that. The king of Judah is a guy named Josiah. Josiah is one of the 8 good kings of the south. And he was pretty cool in that he went through a series of reforms. Right? So he looks at the environment, it's kind of pagan, and he comes across the law, and he realizes what God wants for the people, and so he starts saying, we're going to stop worshiping these idols, or we're going to start reinstituting ceremonies, and we're going to get back to the worship of the Israelites. That's what we're going to do. So Josiah does that, right? But then on this occasion, this Necho guy wants to come through his territory to go up to Assyria, and Josiah says, no, we're not going to have any of that, and he says, you're not coming. And Necho's like, you're cute, but I'm in sync, and you're 3 dudes on a corner in Sultan, so I'm going to do what I want to do. And so he's going to go through Judah anyway, and in light of that, Josiah says, I'm getting an army, man. So he puts together an army, but then Josiah does something that's very unique. He says, you know what, I'm not going to ask you guys to do something I'm not willing to do as soldiers. And so he dresses as an everyday average soldier and goes into battle with his men. And of course the men are like, yeah, he's like one of us. I like this guy sitting around the fire. He's eating, he's drinking, he's tooting. He's like, he's one of us. Here's the problem. He doesn't last long and he dies. So King Josiah is killed by Necho of Egypt. And so what they then do is they say, well, we need somebody else to sit on the throne. So they find Josiah's son and say, you become king. Now the problem with that is this guy's kind of a derp, actually. He doesn't know fully what he's doing. He's not a godly man necessarily. And so he's pretty instantly going to start to slip backwards. Right? Well, the king of Egypt, Necho, comes back through and says, I don't like that guy. And he takes him off the throne, and he takes another one of Josiah's sons, and he puts him on the throne. He says, I like this guy better. Now, that guy was double the derp of his derpy brother. He was more sinful, more prone to idol worship, everything else, but he's going to stay on the throne for 11 years in that position. And he's a friend of the king of Egypt, who is not necessarily by any stretch a guy that cares about God's things. And so the people of Judah just continue to get more sinful, more sinful, more sinful. Now, while that's all happening, the Babylonians, there to the east, they're on the move, right? So in 612 BC, they finally defeat the Assyrians, and in 605, they go and they defeat the Egyptians, and so all those boy bands are wiped out. And now they're starting to look toward Judah, right? And they see that little place, and they see that just broken system that is in that country, because the country, as it's had, Josiah's other son on the throne, has become very sinful. It's become very, very broken, very ugly in a lot of ways. And so it's kind of easy pickings, too, for the Babylonians. Because when you have a culture that's falling apart internally, it's very easy to then wipe it out from an external point of view, especially when you're the Babylonians and you have a lot of power. And that takes us then to the man of Habakkuk. Because he is a guy that is seeking to honor God under Josiah's son. And he sees everything that's going on internally to his culture, externally with the Babylonians. And so he begins to call out to God and begins to have a dialogue with God, which is interesting about this particular book. You are going to see a dialogue between a prophet and God about the situation that is before them. So it starts in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 1, the oracle that Habakkuk, the prophet, saw. Now, he is a contemporary of guys like Jeremiah and Nahum. I mean, these are, these guys who would have been around the same period of time. And he's there and he's seeing the mess, right? So before he even gets off on what's going on with the Babylonians, he just sees what's going on with God's people. And that's what he's going to begin to raise with God. That's where this book's going to open up. He's going to begin to complain to God about the conditions that he sees. And so that starts in verse 2. He says, "O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not hear? Or cry out to you violence and you will not save?" Right? So he's opening this thing up saying, God, this is real simple. I've been praying about this for a long time. I've been watching what's going on with Habakkuk, the new king. I've been watching what's going on with your people. I've cried out casually saying, God, are you going to help? I've screamed bloody murder to you. Look, there's violence everywhere. And what are you doing? Where are you at in the chaos, right? Josiah sought to bring us back to your truth, and in that truth, I was able to see your law, and in your law, I was able to see the good theology of your character. I read that you are loving, I read that you're compassionate, but I also read that you are just, and I read that you are holy, and so I've got the right book, but my experience doesn't line up with the book that I've read, right? I've read about you, but now I see this circumstance and I see what people are getting away with, and it just seems that my experience and my theology aren't really on the same page. It says in verse 3, "Why do you make me see iniquity? And why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me, strife and contention, they arise." He says, come on, God, look around. If you're so committed to purifying your people, you might want to actually engage. You might want to be a parent that shows up at the house every once in a while because I keep looking around and I keep seeing the problem. Doesn't this sound like maybe something that every once in a while you experience in your own life? When you look at even our own culture? Where you go, God, come on. Look at the news. Right? Just flip the channels, God. Look around. Get on social media, read the articles, see the stories, right? Look at the tabloids, Lord. Just look at the crime. Look at the indifference. Look at what the Supreme Court does. Look at what the politicians do. Look what's going on in entertainment. Look what's going on with children as victims in the sex trafficking industry. Look at the Kardashians, God. That's enough, all right? Look at Miley Cyrus. Look at gluten. Look at whatever it is, right? So look around, God. People have domesticated cats. Look around. It's like, do you not care, right? You start being that ranting old man, after a while. It's like, come on. This place is a mess, right? It's a mess. This is exactly how this poor prophet feels. Habakkuk just sees all of it. He says, this is just broken. In fact, it's so broken. Verse 4, he says, the law is paralyzed. are literally numb, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. Man, all you have to do is look at things like, why is it that the wealthy seem to be able to get away with a lot more than the poor? Why does it seem like nowadays things like the Constitution bear very little power in our culture? And you start to feel like, where's the justice? Where's the sense of keeping the laws? Why is it that people in power gain more power and people without power or those to defend them seem to just lose all the time? Why does it seem that you're marching uphill if you don't have the right connections, but the people with the connections just end up having more connections? Right? All of that is what he's struggling with. He sees the exact same things that we see. So the feeling's the same. When you start to look at things like your government or your culture or your neighbors and you see everything that is broken, you're going to feel like this guy. And you're going to wonder, is God showing up in the mess, right? And so this is not just asking a question. It's a bit of an indictment on the part of Habakkuk, right? Because again, his experience is telling him a lot of things. And so he asks God, where are you in the mess? Which is fair. Where's God in the mess? Now, what's interesting about this is that God is going to begin to answer, right? And he's going to answer in different layers. We're not going to get through it this morning. We're only going through chapter 1 this morning. But what God is going to do is something that we don't like. He is going to give Habakkuk a revelation. He's going to give him a revelation. I want you to hear this now. He's going to give him a revelation, but you know what he's not going to do? He's not going to give him an explanation. He's going to give him a revelation, but not an explanation. We want explanations. We want it to be, God, justify yourself to me in a way that I want to hear. Tell me the answer that will appease me. Don't tell me the answer. Tell me the answer that will appease me. Tell me the answer that will help me connect all the dots so that I'm satisfied. Right? That's what he wants. He wants an explanation. God is going to give him a revelation, which is different. A revelation is just like, here's the answer. I'm not going to piece it all together for you, but I'm going to tell you what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And the temptation is going to be, but that isn't fair, and I don't like it, and wah. You know, all that's there. But that's what happens in a revelation without an explanation. You're just told what you need to know, not everything that you want to hear. So, how does a revelation start? It says in verse 5, look among the nations and see. This is God talking now to the prophet. He says, look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded, for I'm doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. Now, the way this opens up sounds pretty good, right? So Habakkuk's like, why? God's like, all right, get ready to be amazed, right? And I'm sure Habakkuk's like, that's right. Got to go to the top sometimes. Can't deal with all the middlemen. Got to go to the top. Give me your manager. I'm going to God. Right? And God is going to fix this, finally, right? And so he says, prepare to be astounded. He says, all right, I'm ready to be astounded. He says, behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans. Now, you may not know who the Chaldeans are, but they're the Babylonians, right? So can you imagine, I'm going to try to fill this in for you. Here's Habakkuk. I have an issue. God says, all right, I have an answer. Prepare to be amazed. I'm going to use the Babylonians to deal with the problem that you're raising. And instantly, Habakkuk would just have a pit in his stomach. His stomach would instantly turn upon this news. Because the Babylonians, and we're going to read about them here, they are not a pleasant bunch. They are cruel, they are ruthless, they are evil, they are pagan, and they are vile. They are unstoppable, and they have zero mercy. Right? I'm going to give you a comparison that is a very fair comparison. This would be like you at home arguing with God. God, do you see the news? Do you see politics? Do you see moral decay? Do you see the divorce rate? Do you see the marital problems? Do you see the children problems? Do you see our cultural problems? We love porn and we love money and we love all this. God, how are you going to fix the United States of America? And God says, I am raising up ISIS to fix the problem. And instantly, you're like repulsed. And here's what you're doing instantly. No. The Babylonians were not as bad as ISIS. This is what you're starting to think. You're already starting to go, no. God wouldn't use a group like ISIS to deal with his sinful people because ISIS is deplorable, but the Babylonians, they were organized or something. It's like, no. The Babylonians honestly, they were worse than ISIS. They were just completely bloodthirsty, ruthless in their invasion process. And so it'd be just like that, where God says, the only way I can deal with the moral decay of your culture is I've got to raise up this group that doesn't worship me, doesn't want me, as opposed to me, highly pagan, totally bloodthirsty, ruthless. They will destroy the system as you know it. It'll stay destroyed for a long period of time, but this is how I'm going to fix it. That's going to raise the question, where is God when evil and calamity and brokenness seem to be on the rise? Poor Habakkuk is probably standing there speechless going, why did I ask? All right? Why did I ask? In fact, if anything, it's like, he's just got to be stunned. Like, I bet it isn't even registering at first. It's too far off the beaten path, right? Because the Judeans, they're sinful, but the Babylonians, they're way worse, right? Here's how much worse they are. God begins to describe them. He says, behold, I'm raising up the Babylonians, basically, that bitter and hasty nation. This is their attitude, right? He first begins to describe their attitude. They're that bitter and hasty nation who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings that are not their own. They are dreaded and fearsome. Their justice and dignity go forth from themselves. He says, here's their attitude. I want it, it's mine. I want that house, I want that building, I want that woman, I want those kids, mine. And he says their justice goes forth from themselves. They make their own rules as they go. There's no hierarchy of, you got to make sure there's a due process and then there's police officers to deal with the bad guys. No, the bad guys are the cops in this story. And so they just do whatever they want. Their attitude is mine take, and there are no rules. That's their attitude. Then you look at their ability, verse 8, their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than the evening wolves. Their horsemen press proudly on. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swift to devour. This just shows that they have momentum. And they're so certain of their victory, they will ride for miles and still be completely refreshed. Because they're just so driven, like, we're winning, we can't lose. It doesn't matter how far we ride, as soon as we get there, we wipe everybody out. Man, high fives all around, we're Babylon, we're awesome. So that is their ability. Then you see their ambition. Verse 9, they all come for violence. All their faces forward. They gather captives like sand. The idea, it says their faces are forward, means they have no second thoughts. There's no conscience dilemma for these guys. As they roll into a community or a city or an environment, they're not like, man, should we take it easy on the women and children? No, they don't do that. Their faces are just dead set to their mission. They don't care. Right? And so they just invade. Then you see, next, their arrogance. Right? At kings they scoff, and at rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress, for they pile up earth and take it, and then they sweep by like the wind and go on. Right? So just regular dudes riding horseback as soldiers look at kings and laugh. What are you going to do to us? How can you stop us? Oh, you have a fortress, big deal. We just pile up earth and go right over the wall. Right? So we don't care who you are. You can try to pay us off. Can't pay us off. You can try to beg and plead. We don't stop. We don't care who you are. We're in control now. We're the Babylonians. And then ultimately, God even reveals, they're an abomination. He says they sweep by like the wind and go on. And they're guilty men, he says, whose own might is their God. So you got to imagine, all right, Habakkuk, why? God says, here's what I'm going to do. You want an explanation? I'm not giving you an explanation, but I am giving you a revelation. I'm bringing on the Babylonians, and this is what they're like, and they are guilty, and they are godless because they think they are their own God. In other words, what God is saying to Habakkuk is Israel has a cancer, and the Babylonians are the chemotherapy. You have loved your idols for so long. You have loved your rebellion for so long. You have neglected your God for so long. You have loved your power and your strength and your wealth, and you've not had justice, and you've oppressed the poor. And God's going to, even if he wanted to, say, you know what? I've sent a lot of mailmen to you. I've sent a lot of prophets your direction, warning you about what was going to come. I sent Isaiah. You didn't like him. I sent Jeremiah. Nobody listened to him. I've sent you the law. I sent you Moses before. I've given you the covenant. I've promised you in Deuteronomy 28, I will bless you when you obey, and I will throttle you when you disobey. Man, I have tried to reason with these people. I have tried to lead these people. I have tried to kind of massage them in the right direction, but they are stubborn. They don't listen. They do their own thing. And so what I'm going to use is a very harsh measure to fulfill what you see as the problem. I'm going to fix the problem, Habakkuk. I'm going to deal with the fact that you see violence and you see grief and you see destruction internally. I'm going to bring it from an external force, right? Now, I'm sure at this point, Habakkuk is like, I wanted you to deal with the sins of the land, but I didn't want you to use a sinful land to deal with the sins of the land, right? And in part, he's going to struggle because at some level, this is going to seem like an endorsement of the Babylonians on the part of God, right? Like really, of all the things you could do, God, all the people you could use, you're going to use them? You're going to use guilty men whose might is their God? I mean, we're bad, they're worse. Are you really going to use worse to deal with the bad? This is why God says you're not going to believe it. You wouldn't believe it if somebody else told you. I've got to tell you, it's so crazy. And we'll have a tendency to struggle with this, but if you're a student of the Bible, you'll realize that a lot of times God uses things that we would never dream to accomplish his goals. Like we would never dream up the idea that God comes as a man, comes as a servant man, and suffers a brutal, unjust execution to deal with sin. We would never come up with that system. But that's how God does it. God says, you know what? I'm going to use godless people. I'm going to use injustice against myself on the part of humans to rescue them. We wouldn't write that story, but that's the story that God chooses to write. We would never dream that the way that God would grow the church through 2,000 years of growth is sometimes at its most potent through the execution of the church. Like we would never think that, the more Christians you kill, the more people become Christians. We would never come up with that math. But that's the system that God uses so often, right? He uses the blood of the martyrs to grow his church. We wouldn't do it that way, right? We wouldn't think of using really bad guys to kind of chasten God's people when they're bad, but that's what God's going to do here, right? As God basically just takes the belt of Babylon in his hands, and he's taking the people of Judah by the other hand and saying, we're going to the woodshed now, right? Because talking hasn't done it. Explanation at different levels hasn't done it. Your sin is so entrenched as my people, I have to literally use the belt of Babylon now. And it's going to sting, and it's going to go on for a while. It's not going to go on for 1 year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 50 years. It's going to go on for 70 to make the point. That's a rough trip to the woodshed right there. That's all I can say. All right? Now, I think part of why Habakkuk may struggle here, which is why he's going to have a second complaint, is he is like us. We look at everything based on a merit system. Right? That's what I said earlier. He might look, Habakkuk's going to say, we're bad, but the Babylonians are way worse. I mean, God, if you're going to be handing out death and judgment, I've got a great idea. Why don't you go deal with one direction, Babylon first, and then come deal with us? That would be a brilliant idea. That would make a lot more sense. Because they're worse. You already said they're guilty men. And so he starts to make kind of his case to God. And he's going to invoke three different things. The first thing he's going to invoke or appeal to, he's going to appeal to the holiness of God. After hearing that God's going to use the Babylonians, he wants to go, wait, let's slow this down. They're worse, we're not as bad. We're bad, but they're worse. And so let me appeal first, God, to your holiness in verse 12. And this is a weird appeal. I'll explain it in a second. He says, are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as a judgment, And you, O rock, have established them for reproof. You who are purer eyes that cannot see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors or the treacherous, and remain silent when the wicked swallow up the man more righteous than he? Right? So he's responding to God. God said, I'm going to use these guys. And he goes, okay, wait, let me appeal first of all to your holiness. Now, what's weird about this initial response is it reminds me of Lord of the Rings when Smeagol and Gollum keep snapping back and forth. Oh, no, precious, yes, precious. Right? Like that whole duality, right? There's like a certain duality in his first thing where he's orbiting between, yes, God, you're good. Are you really good, God? Right? That's why he says, are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? Right? He's like, are you not the one that sees everything? Are you not the one that endures? Are you not the ultimate holy God? Come on, you should know better than that you're holy. And then he snaps into, but we're not going to die. There's no way we could die. Right? And then he kind of snaps forward again. You, Lord, who have ordained them for judgment. Why would you ordain them for judgment? Because you're holy. But wait, we're not going to die. And so he's just kind of going through these different emotions. You're our rock, right? But you've established them for judgment. Your eyes are pure. You can't look on evil people, but you sure seem to be looking on these evil people as the people to use on us, right? So he's kind of almost like he needs lithium here, almost. It's like he's just all over the place emotionally. And I get it. If I'm Habakkuk, I'm thinking come on, God. Those guys are so terrible. You could use something else. Come on, you've done a lot of awesome stuff to deal with our sin in the past. How about a plague? How about locusts? How about really bad quail? That would be fantastic. Just open up the earth and swallow up a few thousand people. That'd be perfect. Just go Raiders of the Lost Ark, melt their faces off. But don't use those guys over there. Those guys are so bad, right? Is that really holy of you? Is that just? In fact, in some ways, I would say that Habakkuk is going beyond just asking questions to sort of starting to make some statements about God, which is easy to do. That's what we do, right? We go, is God loving and powerful? And then after a while, we go, well, I wouldn't want to worship the kind of God that allows for evil like that. And we start making assessments of God, and he's starting to get a little bit in that realm. Right? So he appeals to God's holiness, but he begins to make little indictments against God. The next thing he does is he appeals to man's helplessness in verse 14. He says, you make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He says, God, not only are you holy, right? You can't look on these evil people, but on top of that, you've made us helpless. Right? You've made us easily crushed. You've made us in such a way that we're easily caught. Right? Like we have no ruler. Come on, God, you should have some level of pity on our situation as well. And so he's starting to build his case, right? If you're holy, you won't use these wicked people. If you're compassionate, you will see our helplessness. Right? So he's, again, just kind of building his case. And then he has his third appeal. And his third appeal is to the Babylonian harshness. He says, you look at them in verse 15. He brings all of them up. This is the Babylonians. He brings all of them up with a hook, and he drags them out with his net. This is the Babylonians taking people out of their homeland, right? He gathers them in his dragnet, and he rejoices and is glad. Therefore, he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet, for by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? Now, for us, that's a little probably confusing to read or to see. The net was the military symbol of power for the Babylonians, right? So the Air Force has thunderbolts. The Navy has an anchor. For these guys, it was a net, the Babylonians. In fact, they've dug up statues of their gods with nets, with people in the nets. And so the vision of the Babylonians is our gods, who are these gods with nets, give us victory over our foes. And we know that the gods are on our side when the nets are full. And so what Habakkuk is saying is, God, listen, these guys have been on a winning streak. And if you use them, they'll stay on a winning streak. And if they do, they're going to begin to think that, you know what? Their gods are actually blessing their efforts, and they're going to become more motivated, and they'll become more merciless. And so, God, do you really want to keep those guys advancing by thinking their gods are blessing them and that they'll keep moving forward? Why would you do that? They just keep filling up nets, and they're going to be more on a rampage if you use them against us. And so he's kind of developed his entire case. If you're holy, you won't use the wicked. If you're compassionate, you'll see your helplessness. And if you're smart, you won't let these guys get on a deeper winning streak believing that their gods are fueling their victories, right? Because then they just keep filling their nets, and then they keep worshiping their gods and giving them more, sacrifices so that they can have more victories. And it just becomes a cycle for the Babylonians. And so he said all of this, right? And I'm sure at this point, here's Habakkuk, arms crossed, looking at God. And then he says in chapter 2, verse 1, he says, I will take my stand at the watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. So he puts all of this into chapter 1. God gives him a revelation. He responds with, that isn't holy, that isn't helpful, that is helping the harasser. And so, God, how are you holy? How are you good? How are you loving? How are you just? I'll wait for the answer. Drop the mic. Boom. That's where he's at. Now we get to see what God is going to say. Now we're not going to get into that this morning. But here is maybe what I will say in summation. What God is going to say is the answer. And it's the way I opened up. I said, we don't always like the answer. But the answer is the answer, right? And in Romans chapter 11, verses 33 to 36, you see what the consistent, simplified answer will always be to every time we have a question about every plight, problem, or sin in our world. It's a very simple answer, where it says, oh, the depth of the riches and the wisdom and the knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, how inscrutable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, or who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen. See, when somebody says, why do all these bad things happen? You say, oh, we just don't know the depth of the wisdom and knowledge of the Lord. His mind is just deeper than our mind. His judgment's just deeper than our judgments. And people go, well, that's a nice excuse. I don't like that answer. And I go back to, but it's the answer, right? And there's no problem with the answer. There's no more problem with this answer than when that 12-year-old kid says to you, but why can't I go to my friend's house? And you say, because I said so. That's not a good answer. It's a perfect answer. Because I said so, right? The kid doesn't like the answer, but it's the answer. And it's the right answer. It's a fair answer. And so why do bad things happen in this world? Because God has a knowledge of things that we don't have. He has an understanding that's beyond our understanding. He has judgments that he's making over a bigger swath of details than we can ever even register. But in that, when we go, well, is God loving? Yes. Is God all-powerful? Yes. Is God still good? Yes, even in the midst of the problem. And for us, it's not about whether the answer is an answer or the problem, I would say, is not so much the answer itself, but it's really that we start deciding if we like the answer. And that gets us in trouble more than what the answer itself is, right? We want a personally satisfying answer. And God says, I didn't come to explain myself, but I did come to reveal myself. And the revelation needs to become enough for us. And so the real question isn't, can we solve the problem of suffering? The real thing for us to wrestle with is how do we live well in the midst of a realm in which there is suffering? How do we live wise? How do we live right? How do we live focused? How do we receive the beauty in the ugly? How do we remain sweet in the sour of things? How do we learn to believe God and his answer more than begrudge God because we don't like the answer? Right? That's always going to be the challenge. And so as we go into Habakkuk chapter 2 and Habakkuk chapter 3, that's going to be the tension that we watch, and then how Habakkuk has to learn, just as we have to learn, how to live in a trusting spirit toward God no matter the chaos. Let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, I thank you for kind of a glimpse into this discussion between you and Habakkuk. It's one that I feel like I've had with you at different times in different ways. Some was fruitful, some was destructive. And I thank you how you used even that, an entire season of suffering intellectually, to humble me, to confront my own sin, to show me that I was proud and I was trying to decide how you should run the universe, instead of me learning to worship you as you run the universe. And so I pray through the rest of this look at this particular dialogue that we will learn that we will learn to trust you, we will learn to find our rest in you, that we will realize it's okay to wrestle if in the end it brings us to worship, as opposed to wrestle and in the end brings us to blasphemy. So continue to teach us and guide us and show us in your good name. Amen.